Did you know that some abandoned schools still have pathways on their original blueprints that no longer exist in the real world? And did you know that one of those erased paths was recently found by someone who shouldn't have known it existed at all? A 27-year-old office receptionist named Mira Dalton had never been to Westford Primary School, a rural campus shut down in 1989 after a landslide damaged the northern hill behind it. She lived 2 towns away, had no relatives connected to the place, and had never shown interest in local history. But over the past year, something about that old school began appearing in her conversations, long before anyone realized she'd never actually been there. It started quietly. Mira would draw thin, looping lines on sticky notes during work meetings. When asked, she'd shrug and say it was just a walkway behind the old building. Her coworkers assumed she meant her own childhood school, until she mentioned a fountain. A circular stone fountain with a single crack on the western edge. No such fountain had ever existed at her school, but Westford Primary once had one, documented only in a faded architectural sketch stored in the county archives. A sketch Mira couldn't possibly have seen. At home, Mira began waking from sleep talking about the path that curves away, and once told her roommate that children used to stand on the stones because the grass was always wet. She spoke these details with certainty, small, useless facts, as if she remembered the texture of the place. Her roommate finally asked, "Have you been there before, to Westford?" Mira paused, confused. She didn't know how she knew the name. One Saturday, without announcing it to anyone, she took a bus out to Westford's rural outskirts and walked toward the rusted gate of the abandoned primary school. Her phone location data later showed she moved with confidence through the overgrown campus, almost as if following an invisible map. A passing hiker reported seeing her slip behind one of the collapsed storage sheds and disappear into a patch of bush and old ivy. He thought she was trespassing and nearly called it in, until she reappeared moments later, moving slowly, tracing her fingers along the back wall of the school as though searching for something buried beneath the plaster. When investigators reviewed the security camera from a nearby wildlife station, they saw something strange. Mira stopped at a seemingly random patch of wall behind the school. Her hand hovered and she whispered, "It should be here. The stones should still be here." The thing is, no one remembered stones ever being there. 2 weeks later, archive volunteers discovered a brittle, water-damaged blueprint of the Westford grounds. It showed everything: the main building, the storage wing, the old hill, and a walkway behind the school. But one detail stood out: a small, curved path labeled the back route stone line, positioned exactly where Mira had stopped. It had been removed in 1974, before Mira was born. 5 days after this discovery, Mira returned to the site with 2 of her coworkers, insisting she could find the end of the old path. They followed her up the slope where the walkway once ran. The air grew colder. Everything was silent except for the crunch of weeds beneath their shoes. Near the top of the hill, Mira slowed. She pressed her foot into the earth. "It's hollow," she whispered. Her coworkers laughed nervously until they heard it too. A soft echo under the soil. They brushed aside dead leaves and found something unexpected: a buried wooden plank. Then another. A whole pattern of them, forming a rotted stairway leading downward into the ground, exactly where Mira insisted the path used to turn and fade. But there was something even more unsettling. On the underside of one plank, written in pale chalk, were 3 words: "Children, keep away." The handwriting matched a sample found in an old lost and found ledger from Westford Primary. A handwriting that belonged to a teacher who disappeared during the landslide of '89. The moment Mira saw the chalk writing, she stepped back suddenly, breathing hard, like she recognized it. When her coworkers asked what was wrong, she said something so quietly they only caught fragments. He told them this wasn't safe. And then she froze, her eyes fixed on the trees as though she heard someone call her name. A cold wind passed over the hill. The bushes rustled. The buried planks creaked, even though no one was touching them. One coworker turned to ask Mira what she was hearing, but she was gone. Not far, just a few steps downhill, standing perfectly still at the edge of the brush. Her posture rigid, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something deep inside the earth. When they approached her, she whispered, "It's open again." No one knew what she meant. And before they could ask, a faint thud sounded beneath the soil, like a door closing somewhere underground. Mira's expression drained of color. She slowly looked at her coworkers and said, "We shouldn't be here." Those were the last words she spoke about the incident. She refused all questions afterward, resigned from her job, and moved back to her parents' home. To this day, no one can explain how she knew the exact placement of a pathway erased decades before she was born, or why she reacted so strongly to a message written under a buried stairway only a handful of people had ever seen. The county sealed off the area weeks later. But hikers claim that sometimes, late in the evening, they hear soft footsteps tracing a curve behind the school, on a path that no longer exists.